You're listening to Cannonball Mindset, a podcast dedicated to helping people achieve the most out of their personal and professional lives. The Cannonball Mindset challenges you to step out of your comfort zone and lean into the possibility of having a life of abundance. Disruptors, innovators, and groundbreakers are all welcome. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the Cannonball Mindset. My name is Chad Samstrom, your host. Really excited to be here. We've had some pretty great authors on, some pretty accomplished authors on, but this guy, I'll just tell you. So usually when I do, if you've listened to these for the last couple of years, the bios are usually I just freelance it because I read about them, I know about them, and then I kind of condense it. Well, this guy, I was trying to condense it, and I'm just like, well, how do you condense all this stuff he's done? So for the first time ever, I'm actually going to read this guy's accomplishments because they're never ending. Michael Erwin is the author of Lead Yourself First and Leadership is Relationship. Leadership is Relationship is one that you actually were on, did a 2-part series with Brene Brown on, right? I'm saying this book is got to be the best book ever. If you get Brene Brown and you on a podcast, it's got to be amazing. So we'll drop that podcast link in the notes. So you'll be able to hear both those podcast episodes by clicking in the link. You'll definitely want to check that out. Besides his books, he also does several other interesting things. He's the founder and CEO of Character and Leadership Center. He's worked with companies like Amazon and sports teams like the Boston Celtics. He's a graduate of West Point. Served 3 combat tours, earned 2 Bronze Star medals, co-founded Positivity Project, mission to empower America's youth, which I love that. Founding board chair for Father Vincent High, which is a private Catholic high school. He's Team Red, White, and Blue founder and executive director at the Health and Wellness Community for Veterans. And to top it off, he's assistant professor in leadership and psychology at West Point. Is that still today? Like you're still a professor at West Point?
So yeah, in the Army Reserves.
Yeah, insane. To top it off, he's a farmer. He lives on 32 acres with his wife and his 4 children. So I don't even know where you get time to farm, but what a resume. Thanks for coming on, Michael.
Hey,
I know your time is valuable.
Hey, great to be here. Yeah, I like to say I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. So I kind of view life as really one big series of relationships, and they come intersecting in different ways. And it's just one big learning experience, And so when you're in one arena, you learn and apply what you learn in one place to the next. So it's actually all beneficial to me, no matter what hat I'm wearing, whether it be in education or in serving veterans or homesteading or writing books or talking leadership. It's actually more related than I think most people realize.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so let me ask you a question. So I found you via your book, Lead Yourself First. I don't even remember where I picked it up, but I picked it up and it's an autograph copy. So let me just tell you that. It's autographed,
that's
right? Which is awesome. It's one of those books that you start reading and you're like, oh, this is going to be good. I got to the part with when you started talking about Dwight Eisenhower, and I was like, I couldn't put it down. Actually, I fly lightly, do like 150 flights a year, and I was reading it on a plane, and I started reading it, and the plane. I always sit kind of in the middle of the plane, and I'm sitting in the middle section of the plane, and I look up, and the people had already passed by. They were deboarding. They were getting off the plane. And I was still sitting on the plane. I was just like waiting for the plane to deboard, and I started reading. And next thing I know, I was so engrossed in it that the plane had deboarded, and I was the only one left on the plane. But so I was captivated by it. But can you tell us about your inspiration behind the book Lead Yourself First, and why you were so compelled to write it?
Yeah, so it started out for me when I deployed to Iraq in 04, 05. I would find time to in the heat and wearing body armor walk. It was almost a mile in each direction from where I worked, the Tactical Operations Center, to the dining facility. And I found myself like just gravitating towards walking versus, we had a couple of gators and golf carts and things like that would, help you go eat, get back so you could get back to work. I found myself craving the solitude of the walk, and I would pray. I would reflect. I would think about work. I would think about home. I thought about a lot of things, on those walks, and I realized how powerful that was to me. And then again, on my deployments in 06, 07, 09, I would find solitude either late at night when sometimes my work day would end at like 11 p.m. I go run and clear my head before going to bed. And so for me, like, especially as an intelligence officer in the military, solitude was really important to gain clarity and then also to make leadership decisions. And so after that third rotation to Iraq or Afghanistan, I was studying positive psychology and leadership in grad school at the University of Michigan. And I read this article that was converted from a speech that was given at West Point. And I was preparing to go back to West Point to teach cadets, where 8-9 years earlier, I was a cadet. And it was all about the role of solitude in leadership. And so I actually reached out to the guy who gave the speech. His name is Bill Dershowitz. He was a professor at Yale at the time. And I told him, like, hey, I read this article, and not only did I find it fascinating, but I shared it with a lot of people, and they also found it fascinating. I was like, I think this actually warrants, a book. And he got back to me, hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate, the kind words and all that. He goes, but I'm already working on a book. And I gave a talk on it because I know leadership is important at West Point, but I'm not a leadership scholar. So if you want to read that book, you need to write it. So he kind of threw the gauntlet down and said, hey, like, if you want to read it and build out your knowledge and inspiration around this topic, you've got to go do the work yourself. And so that began the journey, and I partnered up with federal judge Ray Kethledge. Shortly thereafter, another sort of divine intervention kind of opportunity to connect with him through my brother-in-law, who was clerking for him at the time, and he found the topic fascinating, and so we said, hey, let's do this. Let's work on this project together.
That's awesome. And so in the book, you talk a lot about self-leadership, right? Leading yourself, hence the name, lead yourself first. How do you define self-leadership, and why do you believe it's so crucial in today's world? Like, why is it so crucial today?
Yeah, so I think that leading self is, as we argue in the book, before you can lead others, you have to lead yourself first. Because if you yourself aren't clear, if you're a mess, then how do you expect people to be able to follow you? It feels very hypocritical, to be taking leadership direction from someone who can't get their own house in order. The reality is, though, it's a challenge for all of us to get our house in order because life is hard, life is complicated, and so while this is an evergreen topic, and while it's always been important to lead yourself, I think it's gotten a lot more challenging and therefore a lot more important over the past 15, 20 years, as we argue in the book, since the beginning of the information age, where it is now natural to be in a hyper state of distraction, where your mind is racing and thinking and being interrupted all the time, to actually be able to step back from all that. That is actually really hard. And if you don't step back from all that noise, how can you possibly lead yourself well? So that's the whole point that we try to make in the book, is that if you're going to be able to lead yourself, it requires solitude. It requires time alone with your own thoughts, where you're not distracted by all the emails and the text messages and the push notifications and the social media apps and all the things that just bombard us today. You've got to find a way for periods of time in a day to step back from all of that, because if you don't, it just deadens the soul and it wears the mind down, to work analytically and to make good decisions and all those things.
So you talk a lot, so I 100% agree with everything you said. It is really profound to think that it's so much easier for a lot of people to tell somebody else what to do, but they can't eat their own dog food. It's a lot harder to do it yourself, right? To go back to what I was talking about earlier, you bring up Dwight Eisenhower right in the beginning of this book. Why is he so influential to drive home this message of what you're talking about leading yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean, and I'm so excited to hear you reference that particular story and chapter as being especially captivating to you. So first of all, Eisenhower went to West Point, class of 1915. So he graduated way before I did. But from my institution, he's actually the one who wrote a letter to the superintendent of West Point in 1946 after World War II ended and said, hey, I observed a lot during World War II. One of them is that a lot of our officers coming out of West Point, they could benefit from some formal intellectual understanding of what leadership is. Most people don't know, it's, yes, World War II is the greatest generation, but most people don't know, like hundreds and hundreds of generals were fired, during World War II. And so Eisenhower is actually the reason that the department that I went back and taught in, behavioral sciences and leadership, was actually created.
Wow.
Was because of Eisenhower. And then there's Eisenhower's definition of leadership, which is, I'll summarize it, it's the art of getting other people to do what needs to be done because they want to do it, right? So there's all these various intersections and reasons why Eisenhower is personally an inspiration to me, but just objectively, 5-star general and 2-term president of the United States, arguably one of the most steady hands, the most important leaders of the 20th century, and so for us to unpack his story and how he journaled to himself and how he overcame all the noise, not in the information age, but in a time when he was also bombarded and overwhelmed with information, I think was really important for us as we were really establishing the evergreen nature of this message.
What is your favorite? I didn't know anything about Eisenhower. I know very little about Eisenhower before I read your book. But after reading that chapter, I was like, man, I need to know more about this guy. What is your favorite Eisenhower story? What story is your favorite one when it comes to bringing up the type of leader that Eisenhower was?
Yeah. Well, the most compelling, captivating story, I think, about Eisenhower is that in 1935, he was a major serving in the Far East, carrying General MacArthur's bags. And a major, for those who don't have any understanding of the military, that's basically like an 04. He essentially was like getting ready to term out of the military. And so he went from 04 to 010 in basically 7 years. He went from being like essentially just a middle of the pack major to then getting promoted to lieutenant colonel, and then he just was in the right place at the right time, made the right decisions, did the right things. And it's almost impossible to explain this, because when I was teaching at West Point as a 30-year-old, I was a major. Majors don't have a ton of responsibility.
Yeah.
And to go from being a major and being the general's aide to General MacArthur, in 1935, and then 6 years later, as Pearl Harbor happens, being called into the Secretary of Defense's office and having the insight when he asked, what should we do here? What would you, General Marshall, what would you do? He said, can you give me a couple hours? I'll come back to you with my recommendations. Rather than just like spitballing it and just trying to make something up on the fly, he said, can you give me a couple hours to think, get inside my brain, and then come back to you with an answer, right? And so he goes from, again, like this middle of the pack, like not very important, role, to being the Supreme Allied Commander, by early 1944. I mean, it's absolutely amazing.
Unbelievable. So one of the things you talked about is, when we talk about this idea of leading yourself, right now, I think it's more prevalent now than ever before, where people are really trying to balance their personal and professional lives. They're trying to figure out, how to have, because a lot of people lives changed after the pandemic when they were able to be at home for dinner, when they were able to, take their kids to soccer practice. They were, there was a lot more flexibility there, and they're struggling on how to manage their personal and professional lives. How can self-leadership, how does self-leadership help maintain a healthy balance and prevent burnout, prevent this struggle?
Great question. This is one I think that just about everyone's grappling with right now. Depending on whether you worked at an office or remotely prior to COVID, it's just this idea that, I think a lot of people got a taste of more freedom, in terms of when to do their work, how to do their work, how dressed up, you had to get, of course, the old meme of like, I'm wearing a suit here and I'm wearing shorts, underneath.
Right.
I think people got a taste of being able to do work with less of the stress and less of the pressure. Obviously not all people who are nurses, frontline workers, they were more, way more stressed out. But for the average person who would typically go into an office to now work from home, it gave that this sense of, okay, wow, I would really like to be able to have some more of that freedom and flexibility in my life. And I totally understand that, and I think what's really interesting at this point in time is we'll see how it goes from here moving forward. But I think that, there's going to be more and more companies that are starting to require people to come back to work, probably 3 days a week, for lots of reasons. And whether you agree with it or disagree with it, companies are trying to make decisions, I think, that are in their best interest and the best interest of the team. And while a lot of individuals may not care for that decision, I think that, employees are going to have to make the decision of like, well, I'm either going to go somewhere else or go start my own thing, or I'm going to get used to being back in person 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So go back to the question about self-leadership here. I think it really is important. And we talk a lot in the end about first principles and being really clear on your first principles. And so, hey, if you're in a season of life where raising your children is the most important thing, right? Based upon their age or based upon what they're doing or that kind of stuff, then I think then people, should gain the clarity and say, no, this is a chapter of life that I'm willing to go to part-time, to work remotely all the time with the flexibility I need to be able to take care of my first priority, right?
Agreed.
Then there's other people who either don't have kids or their kids are, they're empty nesters, their kids are out of the house, or their kids are in a season of life where they can work full-time. But if your job is requiring you to be in person and that doesn't work for you anymore based on that season of life, you have to have this, to tap into the power of solitude to gain the clarity that, for right now, I might need to take a break from this job or even kind of suffer the consequence of not being on the up and up for promotions by stepping back for this 3 or 5 year window of my life.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's a lot easier said than done because that's a tough choice. But at the end of the day, having clarity around what you want and having courage to do it, those are the two. And you talk about clarity and conviction, right? So clarity and conviction to get what is what leadership is. The idea of this is what's important to me right now, and that's going to come at a sacrifice, and I'm willing to sacrifice this because it means so much to me.
That's exactly right, 100%. And this idea of having courage, no doubt about it, like you said, that'd be a difficult choice, and I think this, for working parents, this is the big question. Obviously, you have to make enough money to make the ends meet. There's all these things that you have to do, that you have to weigh in your decision-making process to make those choices. But I do think that sometimes some people don't take the time to slow down enough to engage in solitude and really to ask themselves, hey, if I'm being required to come back into work, does that work? What are the consequences, right?
Yeah.
So if I do that and I'm not around now to do all those things that I did for that 3 years, with my children or with my whatever it might be, then I think that's a real thing that we should ask ourselves. And it's not comfortable and it's not easy and it comes with all kinds of friction. But I think that's the whole point of solitude, is that's where we tap into the ability to our inspiration, to our soul. We tap into that, really that restlessness, in our hearts and in our minds to make the best decisions for us, in that moment.
Yeah. I think I agree. And I think it goes both ways. If you want to work from home 3 days a week, but the company wants you in 5 days a week, you got to have clarity. But the company needs to have clarity too. And the clarity doesn't have to be this. I think this is where we get in trouble. It's, they won't let me work from home anymore. Well, that's their business.
Right.
That's their business model, and they're making the best decision for their business, right? And so, there creates this animosity, the employer's the evil empire because they won't let us work from home anymore. Well, they have a business run and they're making decisions. I own my business, right? And so I'm making the best decision. Yep. I brought all my people back. They worked from home and then we brought them all back. And, luckily everybody wanted to be back. But, if somebody says, well, that doesn't work for me, then I respect the fact that it doesn't work for me, but you need to respect the fact that you work from home doesn't work for me, right? And I think, but I think you're on both sides. It's clarity and conviction on both sides.
I love that. Yeah, it's a really great point. And that is the thing. Boy, is this ever an emotional, hot button, contested issue? I see people post on LinkedIn about it, and you would think that someone someone spit in your face. You know what I mean? Like the way that people they respond to it, and I think it's just having that balance, like you just said, knowing that people are coming at this from different vantage points, and there's not necessarily like a quote unquote right answer, but there can be like the right answer for you as a leader, like of a business or a nonprofit, or there can be a right answer for you right? As a working parent, or as somebody who wants to have this balance in your life, and it boils down to, can you engage in solitude to achieve that clarity to make the right decision for you, whether that be your business or your nonprofit, or that be for you personally and your personal life.
Yeah, that's why I think leadership now, post pandemic, and kind of where we are in society, I think it's getting a lot harder. And I'd be interested to get your take on this.
Absolutely.
What I mean by this is, if I just stick to the same topic we were just talking about, everybody that worked in an office 5 days a week pre-pandemic had no problem working in the office 5 days a week, right? Because they were blissfully unaware of what the other side looked like. It was like my wife, the first time my wife flew in first class on a plane, I was like, you can't do this because we're not first class people. Yeah, we're not first class people. And she's like, no, I'll be fine. Because she was blissfully unaware of how miserable it was sitting center seat and coach, right? Until she had something to compare it to. And so now everybody's perspective has changed and their expectations now have changed, which has made leadership a lot harder, because you also add the emotion in there. I think it just makes it much more difficult now.
100%. Yeah, the analogy I use is, it's like if you go drink like a glass of Opus One wine, or Dom Perignon champagne, right? Like if you ever got go to some place and someone and then you have that and you're like, dude. And then you go back to your $3 Chuck,
Somebody gave me a glass of Pappy Van Winkle. The restaurant we were in Charleston at a restaurant called Fig, and the client I was with bought me an old fashioned, a Pappy Van Winkle old fashioned, right? And I was like, I never had it. It was so good. And I was like, he was like, you're screwed now. And I'm like, he's like, because your maker's mark is never going to taste the same again, right?
Yeah,
and that's
totally.
exactly what
like
you're
you said,
talking about.
It's that comparison, and I talk about this a lot. Even when I was back at West Point, and I would introduce myself to my cadets, I would say, be very careful about your comparison group. And so again, if you're comparing yourself to someone else who might have, it's significantly quote unquote better than you, or more comfortable than you, like you can find yourself comparing yourself to them and focusing on how much worse off you are. Whether that be flying a first class experience or what you drink or what you eat, you have to have the ability to say, no, this is a special experience. I had this great glass of Pappy Van Winkle, scotch, and now I'm back to my normal stuff. But if you go back to what it could be, like you set yourself up for misery, And I think that you're exactly right about, from a leadership standpoint, that is the reality. I think from the leadership angle, is that it has gotten more difficult because people did get the exposure to having more of that the flexibility, the freedom, and now it's hey, look, you're getting paid for a reason. It's a job. You don't necessarily love everything about the job, and the hope is that you love and enjoy the people that you do the job with enough that you will want to be around them and want to do the work together in person as often as possible. But if you don't, it is definitely a tough pill to swallow, and has made it very challenging for leaders to navigate through this, because like you said, it gets very emotional and very contested, and it's tough. It's difficult to lead.
And everything was flexible. Like we found ourselves, I think, as a society, especially as leaders, we found ourselves being a lot more flexible in that situation than we ever had before. And now it's like, well, listen, I want to be flexible, but I can't be that much of a Gumby doll. I gotta be some rigid here. And so, we forewent a lot of standards in companies, a lot of the expectations. If you think about just in customer service, the customer service through the pandemic was, you were seen as a tyrant if you wanted to get your food at the drive-thru, and like if you were upset if you had to wait 30 minutes. Like, no, just be kind to everybody, but have low expectations. And now people are raising the expectations back to the standards, and it's a difficult way to navigate. It's certainly what we see is very difficult.
Yeah, spot on. Once again, you're spot on. I think with another really important point here is the expectations. People were very, offered a ton of grace, empathy, and understanding that a lot of people were struggling psychologically, either out of fear or not be able to see people in person, missing birthdays, missing major life experiences. There was a lot of empathy and grace, interpersonally flowing around the world, in 2020 and 2021. While also, yes, a lot of division and a lot of other stuff, but there was definitely, a lot of people who experience that opportunity for grace, and now, like you said, people have just raised the bar back up, and said, nope, like I'm expecting this, faster at a certain time and a certain clip, and I think we've gotten back to more of that pace. I think you're spot on.
Yeah. In your book, you talk a lot about, you mention it, and it's the emphasis on the role of self-awareness and in effective self-leadership. How can individuals develop a greater sense of self-awareness, and why is it so significant in leading yourself? Where does self-awareness play in that whole idea of leading yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I say this frequently, but there is no finish line to self-awareness. Yeah. Self-awareness is a perpetual struggle and journey, and I think that's challenging for us to know, because like you don't sit there and figure yourself out and then you're like, okay, I got the answer. Here it is. It's good for life. Kind of like a college degree. Like, yep, no one's taking that away from you. Self-awareness needs to evolve and change with the times, with your changing situations, et cetera. And so again, to be able to lead yourself well, a fundamental part of that is that you have to be aware of yourself. You need to know yourself. And I think that it's a lot easier said than done. I think that it is often challenging to be able to really know ourselves, because a lot of it we need feedback from other people, but there is, again, the role that solitude and reflection plays in that. Yeah. And a lot of people, what I've seen over against other, they're unwilling or they don't prioritize the work of solitude and reflection in building out their self-awareness. Yeah. And if you don't build that into your priority list, it does not happen in the world today. It just doesn't.
Agree. I couldn't agree more. I think self-awareness is like, I have a friend who says the most successful people in the world are the most self-aware people, which I agree. Self-awareness is the key fundamental, but self-awareness by itself, the only thing self-awareness does is give you choice. You still have to choose, right? If I'm aware, if I become self-aware that my leadership style is rough and demoralizing, well, being aware of it doesn't change it. The choice to change it changes it. The actions change it, right? I'm saying, so self-awareness is the cornerstone, but there still has to be a choice at some point once you learn more about who you are, who you want to become. Yeah,
that's right. Absolutely. And
So when you think about this idea of self-leadership, what are some common misconceptions that often come across when it comes to lead yourself first and this idea of self-leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, people often, one of the misconceptions, is that solitude has to always be productive. And the reality is sometimes it can be just rest. Right, it can be sitting there breathing and letting go of like the things in your brain and the stressors. I mean, think about what's literally going on in our brain from a bioscience standpoint. There's like about 80 billion neurons, that are crammed up into your brain, your cerebrum and your cerebellum, that are racing around, that are trying to build connections based upon your experiences or what you're doing. I mean, and if they're firing all day long and they're constantly going, responding to an environment, thinking, always like reading something, processing something, watching something, listening to something, they're overactivated. And so sometimes I think solitude can just play its role by allowing us to just not process something, not be exposed to the input from other minds for a period of time. Yeah. So I think that's a big thing that I would say, in terms of self-awareness, another thing I think it's important just to build on what I said a little while ago, this idea of that it is a perpetual journey, right? To be able to understand yourself, and something can happen in just one day, and one day can change everything. Yeah. You can change your perspective on something, it can change your outlook on something. And so therefore self-awareness, there is no finish line. There is no end of the book. It's this process that is never ending to keep knowing yourself and then asking yourself, okay, based upon how I see myself and how I understand myself, how do I need to show up differently? How do I need to show up to this particular situation? So for me, that is like one of the big things is, I'm not going to say that like people think that there's a finish line, but I do think a lot of people believe that once you develop a sense of knowledge of who you are, that's relatively static and you're good. And I think that's not right. I think it's something that you constantly have to work at. And so as soon as you get complacent on this and think you got yourself figured out, and you don't do the hard work of self-reflection in solitude, it might only take a day. It certainly, can only, take a month, and you're 5-8% different. You're even just 2 degrees off course than where you were.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's important to just be aware of.
So what advice would you give somebody who is starting the journey to this idea of self-leadership? What are some initial steps they can take to begin leading themselves more effectively?
Yeah. So I think the first place I would go with is solitude, is making a practice of carving out time, whether it be in the morning or in the middle of your, crazy day, or at night, or how you use physical activity, or how you drive somewhere, not always having to make a phone call or having a podcast on or the music on. Can you carve out a ritual in your life that gives you that space at that time to just get inside your mind and think and analyze and reflect? Because if you don't make time for it, I keep going back to this, if you don't make time for it, if it's not a priority, it's not going to happen. Yeah. There's too many distractions. There's too many temptations that float around us all day long via our phones or the internet or our computers or iPads or our televisions or, future developments of AI driven technologies. Like, there's just too much stuff around us that can pull us into that rabbit hole. So I think it really starts with committing to the process of engaging in solitude. And that's why we wrote the book, honestly, not to lecture people on it, but if you read the stories, hopefully you're inspired. You say, wow, this is how Dr. Martin Luther King did. This is how General Eisenhower did. This is how, Ulysses S. Grant, President Abraham Lincoln, Jane Goodall, T.E. Lawrence. That's how some of these profound leaders tapped into the power of solitude in these big moments in their life. And the goal is to motivate people to do that.
What's funny is you mentioned that. So I have, I'm an underliner and a highlighter. So I can never give my books away because they're all ruined by the time I get done them, right?
Yeah.
And,
right.
But the idea of, like you were talking about, Ulysses S. Grant, and I'm captivated by him. I live in Maryland, near I'm only an hour from Gettysburg. I'm a huge Civil War guy. Talk to me about Ulysses S. Grant and his type of leadership style that resonated with you.
Oh yeah, Grant was, talk about another fascinating story. Studying the life of Ulysses S. Grant. From West Point, to the Mexican-American War, he was a hero, and then coming back and starting in failed business after failed business after failed business, becoming essentially an alcoholic, and in life in a very, bad spot. Wow. And then see him turn around, the nickname he of course received was, Never Surrender Grant, just the idea of perseverance. And just like, we're not going to quit. We're going to wear you down. And it's not only relevant to war, it's relevant to life. Whatever you're pursuing, the persistence and the perseverance you need when the battle's not going your way. He was, another quote he talked about was like, well, they licked us today, we'll get them tomorrow. Right? Like, this idea of perseverance was absolutely incredible. But yeah, there's a whole 3-part series on Amazon that's really well done about Grant's life. It's about 4.5 hours total, and it's got some actors and some historians. So it's a hybrid blend of how to tell his story of leadership in life. He freed, he was given a slave when he returned, and he, long before like this war, he freed his slave. So he was convicted, to, in the Union's cause. But bottom line is that he was a nonconformist, and he was someone who was willing to think way outside the box. And without reading all the details, when you read about the Battle of Vicksburg and what he did, again, after general after general after general before him failed to take Vicksburg, the high ground on the mighty Mississippi. Yeah. He basically said, well, we're going to do this. And it was a very, very different plan. And everyone, when he came out of the tent and briefed him on the plan that he, concocted in solitude, everyone thought he was crazy. Everyone, and sure enough, it worked. They crossed over in the middle of the night. They lived up the land. They marched way to the south. And they didn't just come up. They enveloped. They went inland and they went around. They made it so hard on themselves, but they lived off the land. And that was the only way in his mind that they would actually be able to truly envelop them and surprise them and attack from the rear, And so again, that ability to come up with a plan that other people think is crazy, but is going to work in solitude, that's inspirational.
That's clarity and conviction. Conviction, right? I keep going back to that because that's what you get out of the book. So I'm a runner, right? So I run a lot. For me, the solitude is found on the run, right? The solitude is found in those miles. I did a 10-mile run this morning at 4:30 this morning, and it was perfect. It was like perfect solitude down some gravel roads. It was like perfect. Do you think the expectation that people have of what solitude looks like and what it should feel like and what it is stops people from entering it? Do you think, because I can tell you the first couple times, I would go for a run, I wasn't thinking, oh, this is solitude, this is time for me to get clarity. I was just thinking, don't die, right? And then I started realizing that, man, when I'm on these runs, some of my best ideas come to me. Some of my best, I'll have to pull out my phone as I'm running and type stuff in my notes section, like, oh, don't forget that, right? But do you think people have an expectation of what it is, which stops them from doing it?
For sure. I think a lot of people think that you've got to be sitting cross-legged quietly, with your eyes closed and, doing the old meditation, pose that a lot of people think of, or that you have to be doing it like sitting completely still. There's actually multiple ways that you can engage in that solitude. One of them is to sit completely still, right? And to close your eyes and to breathe deeply and to focus on the present moment and focus on your thoughts. But a lot of it is actually in motion. And I think there's a pretty good empirical case that actually says for a lot of people, solitude while the body is in motion is actually more productive. And so that's how it all started for me. It started with running and walking in Iraq, running in Afghanistan, then running back in Ann Arbor, Michigan when I was in grad school. That's when I tapped into the power of solitude. In those moments, it involved motion, not sitting still.
Yeah.
And there was definitely a time and a place for sitting still. Like Abraham Lincoln would write, Eisenhower would write to himself, and you can't do that while running.
Yeah,
but
right.
So there is a role that solitude in the stationary variety does play when we have to get our thoughts out of our brain and on the paper. But a lot of times it literally is just go for a walk on your own or a runner on your own. And when you do that, that's where you give your brain the space to engage in solitude in a productive way.
Awesome. What are some potential challenges or obstacles that people may encounter on their self-leadership journey, on their lead themselves first journey? What are some of the challenges, and then how do they overcome that?
Yeah, I think the big one is probably that people, they, in our instant gratification world, they want immediate results. And sometimes you engage in solitude and you come back from that run or that walk or that session and you're like, damn, I didn't figure anything out.
That's right.
Well, you might not figure anything out in the moment, but you might figure out something a little bit later. By setting the conditions in your brain, you might have prepared yourself to be able to figure it out later in a conversation with someone. And so it's not judging the immediate results as the end all be all to is solitude worth it or not. And I think that to me is a really important part of this, is that it's a process. Like life is a process, coming up with good ideas is a process. And so sometimes that means you're not going to come up with those good ideas or make that big decision while in solitude in the moment, but it might very well set the table for you to gain that clarity or have that breakthrough moment later on when you're having a conversation with somebody, and so it's just, you have to commit to the process of believing the common sense, honestly, that yes, it's critical that the brain put it down, put down the work for a little bit, put down the nonstop bombardment of stories and texts and posts and tweets and news stories, and put it down, right? Put it down for a little while. And if you commit to that process, that's where the power comes in over time, not necessarily overnight. And that is a stumbling block for people, is they want, hey, I'm going to go do solitude for 30 minutes and I want to come back with it all figured out, and you might, but you might very well not, and you have to commit to and stay committed to the process, not just basing it upon the outcome.
So I love that. So is this for anybody though? Really, can anybody practice in this solitude? Can anybody have this clarity? I'm I'm non-college graduate, I'm a single mother, I'm this. Like, is this really just for the few, or is this for everyone?
Yeah, no, I think it's for everyone. I think it's for everyone. You know, if there was to be people who it's more for, it's definitely introverts. People who crave the minimal stimulation environment. They crave solitude. My co-author, Ray Ketledge, big introvert, he talks about it. I'm a huge extrovert, so I don't crave solitude. I have to make it a deliberate practice, something that I take seriously and that I prioritize in my life, because it does not come naturally. To Ray and to lots of introverts, it's a natural state of pursuit. They are, consistently in pursuit of those periods of solitude. And so I think for introverts who don't get solitude, it can contribute to being burnt out and to getting worn down. Whereas extroverts draw energy generally by being around people. And so for me, like, it's for everybody, and the research shows that. And even for extroverts, that engaging in solitude, while they may not seek it out intentionally as much as their introverted peers, they also derive the value and the benefit of tapping into solitude. And so yeah, it's for everybody.
So let me ask you a question. So, in your opinion, are people born leaders? Like, I know solitude for anybody, but you study leadership, you study the great leaders, you've studied Grant Eisenhower, you've been to West Point, you've taught at West Point, you've been around great leaders your entire life. Is leadership, can anybody become a great leader, or is leadership only for a special few?
Yeah, so this is a perpetual debate, depending on who you talk to. In the leadership field, they have different views. I generally think the research is right. I agree with the research, because there's so many confounding variables. So it's not like this is like super clear, like blood draw, like, and here the data, the hard data is. There's always some degree of like wicked world problem here. But I generally agree with it that about 50% is more or less set in your genetics, and 50% is absolutely nurture, right? So nature and nurture. So it's a nature and nurture for sure. I think some people are predisposed to being leaders, but like, let's not forget, some people who might be a great leader in one environment are a train wreck somewhere else. Even if you're a great leader in let's just take sports, look at Urban Meyer, an incredible leader in Utah, in Florida, in Ohio State, right? And then he goes to the pros, and doesn't, in last 1 year as head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Not even, yeah.
Same sport, same sport, Shaka Smart, VCU, a small school in Richmond, Virginia, puts it onto the mat, top 25 team, goes to the University of Texas for 5 years and, can't turn the corner. Yeah, goes to Marquette the very next year, 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, right? So like leadership is so complicated in this way that, you might be a great leader in one environment and then go home, and in your personal life or in a volunteer role, you might struggle mightily. You might not be a leader in your job. You might not manage anybody in your day job, but then you go home and you volunteer in your church or in a nonprofit, and you do a great job of leading because you're a great listener and you're highly empathetic to people's struggles. And so the situation matters a lot when you think about like leadership. So, I think absolutely, this is a big consideration as we think about, like leadership and how we can be a great leader and how it's learned. So the short answer to your question is definitely learned, but just as you're a great leader in one environment, certainly does not guarantee that you're a great leader in another environment. And you have to work at it based upon the contextual situation you find yourself in.
Yeah. Awesome. A couple more questions. So, for people that right now are going to go get this book, Lead Yourself First. So we've given them a trailer here. What is the one message? If they'll get a ton out of it for sure, but if there was one message you want them to get out of it, what would it be?
Yeah, I think that that leaders, I think we're all better, and we understand that the deepest source of inspiration for how to live our lives comes from within us. And I think we look externally for motivational talks, podcasts, books, articles. We look to a lot of things for inspiration and how to live our best lives, be our best selves. But I really think that you can't, with all that stuff externally in the world, added together is not as important as being in touch with and really knowing ourselves and knowing how we need to lead our lives, and I think that solitude, is an essential element of that. And if we don't slow down, we don't go inward, we don't do that hard work, that analysis, that reflection, I think it's really nearly impossible to reach our optimal version of ourselves.
Love that. All right, what's next for you? So again, you have two great books, Lead Yourself First and Leadership is Relationship. What's next? What's the next project you're working on? What do you see is on your heart right now?
Yeah, so I think I'm launching a podcast in 2024. Don't know yet. Waiting to see, but I've been mulling it over. If I should do that. So like I'm thinking about that, and I'm also thinking about like a next book. If I write a third book, honestly, because I didn't think I would ever write a book. I never had like dreams of being an author. Yeah. And then after the first one, I certainly said no. I'm a one and done person. And then Leadership is a Relationship. Sort of really hit me at this moment, like prior to COVID, but then COVID, it was very clear, like, wow, people are going to really need this message coming out of COVID. So I think I'm really interested in writing a book around resilience, and the role that everything from solitude to faith to relationships to our mindset and our attitude, how they all shape and influence our capacity to be resilient. Because adversity is inevitable in life. We're not getting out of here alive, right? We know people people all along the journey of life we're gonna lose. We're gonna make big mistakes. We're gonna fail. All kinds of things go wrong in life. Yeah. And I'm really honestly not all that interested in how I or other people perform when things are going great, when things are going well. I'm really interested in how do other people handle things when they're not going well, right? And so I'm interested in unpacking and exploring this topic of resilience in a deeper, more qualitative way by getting to know other people's journey and how they have been resilient and what lessons they can teach me and other people about how to be resilient in life.
Love that. I just gave a talk yesterday and I said, we were talking about perseverance and resilience. And I said, I don't think perseverance is learned as much as it is realized. Like the idea, we are resilient creatures. And the challenge is most people just don't know how resilient they actually are. But once you figure out how resilient you have already been in your past, it's really a lot easier to leverage that in the future. People just don't know. Like the battles if you had a bar graph of all the things you've overcome in your life, it'll show you just how resilient you are.
Totally.
Somebody was struggling, and I said, they're probably in their mid 40s, and I said, you survived 100% of the struggles you faced so far to this point in your life. I'm pretty sure you're already resilient. Now it's just tapping.
Totally. That's right. Love that.
Really good. I would love. So if you want to read that book, you gotta have to write it. Just to let you know, Michael Erwin. You want to read that book? You're gonna have to write it.
That's right.
That book doesn't exist. All right. So last two questions. Where do people find you? They want to follow you. They want to get more of you. Hopefully, you will start a podcast in 2024. But until then, where do they get more Michael Erwin? Yeah.
So you can find. I post quite a bit on Instagram. Erwin RWB ERWIN RWB. I'm also on LinkedIn. So I share a lot of these different thoughts around leadership and around, Team Red, White, and Blue and the Positivity Project and these various organizations I'm a part of. That's the best place to go to see, stream of consciousness on some of these things.
Awesome. Are you a podcast listener?
Yeah, I listen to. I'm topical, so when I'm going through a particular challenge or situation, I'll try to find a podcast. So I'm not like I listen to one person over and over and over again as my guide. I'm more like, hey, I really would benefit from hearing a conversation on difficult conversations or on, so that's how I kind of bounce around in that way. And I'll find one that I just want it to help stimulate my thoughts. But going back to the whole topic of what we talked about today, like all I need usually is I want a stimulation. I want a prompt. I want something to prime me because I've got the answers within my mind. I'm confident. But I need sometimes a little jostling or a little, jostling partner, to help me out, jumpstart the thinking.
Yeah, a little ignition to get it started. Yeah, that's great.
Right.
All right, last question. 50, 60 years from now, when you leave this earth, what do you want your contribution to have been?
Boy. Well, it's kind of crazy when you think about how many people have walked the earth before us and are alive right now, and so the idea of being super memorable to like this large number of people is not what I aspire to, I hope that like people can kind of look at the way that I live my life with a other people first mindset. And, really that I've built a legacy through like my family and the people that I have loved and people that I've interacted with, where people can look back and have pictures and have videos of me talking and, sharing thoughts about, the particular topics, listen to me on a podcast like this and say, this is what my great grandfather thought about leadership back in 2023.
How cool is that?
I think a lot about legacy and not in the sense of being famous or being like remembered by lots of people, but really just having clarity on, the legacy that I want to establish like in my family and in the organizations that I'm a member of.
That's awesome. What a great answer. All right. So Michael Erwin, lead yourself first. Leadership is relationship. Make sure you get those. Listen to the podcast episode with him and Brene Brown. It's a 2-part series, 2 parts. Couldn't get it all in one. So make sure you download that, listen as well. Follow him on Instagram. But definitely go find some solitude and read Lead Yourself First. So thanks again, Michael. Much gratitude, much love.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation, Chad.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks everybody for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode.
You've been listening to Cannonball Mindset. To ensure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.